Everyone for coming to this presentation on the history of Pasco. This presentation is brought to you by Communities and Schools of Benton-Franklin. Before we dive right in, I want to take a minute to share a quote that I found by Rosa Luxemburg that I felt really pertained to learning about the history of Pasco. Those who do not move do not notice their chains. Think about that as we navigate through this PowerPoint. As we get into this PowerPoint, the first thing I want to do is mention the Native American history that is around us. For many years, our area was a traditional gathering, fishing, and trading place for Native American tribes. The tribes commonly camped, fished, and wintered from the Snake's Mouth upstream on the Columbia for 8 miles toward the spot where the Yakima River enters. In 1805, the Lewis and Clark expedition arrived at what we know now as Sacagawea State Park. On October 16, 1805, the Corps of Discovery arrived at the confluence of the Snake and Columbia Rivers. The site of today's Sacagawea Historical State Park, they camped for 2 nights amidst the thriving community of Native Americans. As most of us know, a Shoshone woman named Sacagawea was instrumental in the expedition's success. Not only did she work alongside the men, she was an interpreter and a missionary of peace between the white explorers and the Native American tribes. 1879, with the railroad line from Spokane to Portland, it helped to plot the town of Ainsworth at the Snake's Mouth to serve as a railroad construction camp. Ainsworth was full of workers, including hundreds of Chinese and Irish laborers who were laying track and building bridges to aid in the construction of the railroad tracks. In 1884, a railroad bridge across the Snake River was complete. Many of those that were involved in building the railroad were Chinese laborers. Fun fact, lumber for the railroad tracks were floated to Ainsworth from the Yakima River to the north and from the Snake and Clearwater Rivers to the east. In 1885, many of the buildings in Ainsworth were dismantled and or moved to the new town known as Pasco. The Chinese laborers that lived in Ainsworth moved to Pasco and established their own district. In 1891, Pasco was officially named by Virgil Boig, a civil engineer. Boig named the city of Pasco after a city in central Peru known for mining. The city's name was Cerro de Pasco. 1910. The population in Pasco is now 2,083. In 1900, the population in Pasco was 254. It's quite a significant growth, nearly double the size of Kennewick and 5 times bigger than Richland. Still, it's reported to be no more than just a village. In 1919, the town suffered a serious setback when a fire raged through downtown, destroying a number of buildings. Some parts of the downtown were not rebuilt for up to 2 decades. On the evening of December 8, 1919, the worst fire in Pasco's history breaks out in the Pasco drugstore. It soon spreads to the Bank of Pasco and to the adjacent U.S. Post Office building, and eventually destroying 6 buildings. A 16-year-old employee of the drugstore perished in the blaze. Roy Van Ness, 16, was working at the drugstore when he apparently went down into the basement to fix a bulky furnace at about 8:30 p.m. Soon afterward, an explosion occurred, which could be heard blocks away. Flames immediately engulfed the drugstore and then spread to the adjacent Bank of Pasco and U.S. Post Office and several other buildings on the block. Firefighters searched in vain for Van Ness. The fire was out of control and a stiff breeze fanned the flames. There was still burning the next morning. All of the buildings were a total loss, and all of the mail in the post office was destroyed. The bank president promised a rapid rebuilding, but some of the burned areas weren't rebuilt for more than 2 decades. Van Ness had been working at the drugstore after school for 2 years. He was a student in high school and a member of the band. In the 1940s, the U.S. Navy built a naval air training station at the site of the Pasco Airport for World War II. The airport was eventually redeveloped into the current Tri-Cities Airport. In 1941, the Grand Coulee Dam was complete, and that brought irrigation and agriculture to the area. The Pasco Naval Air Station was training hundreds of naval pilots and mechanics. It boasted 70 buildings. In the 1940s and the 1950s, the Hanford site is active. The Manhattan Project from the federal government, making plutonium for the Nagasaki atomic bomb. African American workers were recruited extensively, leaving behind family and friends to work in the Tri-Cities area. In Pasco, the African American population rose from 27 in 1940 to just under 1,000 in 1950. A 1941 federal mandate barred federal contractors from paying lower wages based on race. Hanford brings work, racism, and a chance for growth. Because of the 1941 federal mandate that stated that federal contractors could not pay lower wages to people based on race, derived this next statement. They deemed that the range just enough to placate the Fair Employment Practices Committee's requirements. Out of approximately 50,000 workers at Hanford in July of 1944, roughly 10%, or to put it in more perspective, only 5,000 were African Americans. Pasco was one of the only towns that allowed African American residences. Black workers lived in makeshift housing, like tents, trailers, and shacks. At the Hanford site, there was only one barrack arranged for Black workers. African Americans faced discrimination from businesses in Pasco. According to the NAACP's E.R. Dudley, approximately 80% of restaurants, soda fountains, and lunch counters would not serve African Americans. Law enforcement in Pasco also targeted Blacks. Police in Pasco created a crime called investigation, enabling officers to arrest African Americans without needing to charge them with any specific offense. Some 25% of arrests of African Americans in the 1940s in Pasco was for investigation. Black men being threatened with arrest for crossing Kennewick's Green Bridge at night. Richland, where only 7 Black people lived in 1950 because of racially restrictive practices preventing non-white-collar workers from settling there. Heritage. The ethnic history of an area is sometimes overlooked, yet plays an important role in the development of any city. Little has been written about the contributions ethnic groups have made to Pasco's history, and should be explored in future surveys and historic register nominations. This is by the Pasco Historic Preservation work plan, of 2014 to 2019. And I really want to point out that it says that little is known about ethnic groups and what their contributions have been in the city of Pasco. Yet through this process, I have learned that those are literally the premises that we stand upon knowing what Pasco is today. Let's talk about the Green Bridge. The Green Bridge groundbreaking was in 1921. The bridge was finished in 1922, 1 month ahead of schedule. The bridge collected tolls until 1931 when the cost of the bridge was paid off. The tolls were collected on the Pasco side of the bridge. This Pasco-Kennewick Bridge bore a sign stating that Blacks had to be on the Pasco side by sunset. Kennewick was a sundown town, meaning that African Americans could not be within city limits after dark. So when I was doing the research on this, I thought it was, kind of fun that the Columbia Basin College had temporary quarters on the naval base. Beginning in 1946, Jack Cooney directed a vocational technical school to train workers for the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. He used space formerly occupied by the Pasco Naval Air Station that had been decommissioned at the end of World War II. When it opened for the fall quarter of 1955, the college occupied 5 buildings: the old administration building from the naval base and 4 smaller buildings. The college moved to a new site when new structures were created. 272 new students. Just 34 were women. About 50% of all the students enrolled in vocational programs. The remaining students enrolled in general education courses. For the most part, students had to be graduates of Washington State high schools to be admitted. 1960. A group of 22 picketers from the University of Washington's branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, came to Pasco to protest job discrimination. They handed out leaflets which said that not one single Black person was employed in a Pasco store, bank, or in a professional position within the city. The leaflet concluded, quote, "No wonder East Pasco is a slum," end quote. 1965, Pasco voluntarily integrates its schools. Whittier Elementary School, named after an American poet and anti-slavery advocate, John Greenleaf Whittier. The first Whittier school dates back to 1911, when it was originally called Eastside School. The closure of the school made Pasco the first district in the area to end de facto segregation in schools. In 1968, Pasco School District adopted a desegregation policy outlining the desire to provide the best education to all children. The new Whittier was built in a time of resurgence for East Pasco, as Superintendent Murdoch said at the dedication, quote, "We are not just dedicating a new building, we are signaling a whole new future for the East Side," end quote. The new Whittier was the first school to serve the students of East Pasco in over 3 decades. But as Murdoch said, quote, "Whittier is not just another school. It is a gift of the children of this neighborhood and an investment in their future," end quote. 1966, Pasco City Manager decried the fact that 28 of the last 38 major crimes had been committed in East Pasco. He said that the railroad tracks divided the city, physically, culturally, and economically, and it is our problem, ours to solve. Waves of farm workers who originally came up from Mexico for fruit harvest and field work in the Yakima and Walla Walla valleys boosted the Hispanic population in Pasco from 5 to 18%. Pasco experienced a significant population boom consisting largely of Hispanic residents, and by 2006, Franklin County became the first majority Hispanic county in the Pacific Northwest. Every now and then, a man's mind is stretched by a new idea or sensation, and never shrinks back to its former dimensions. Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. I really want you to think about that quote, what you know now about Pasco, and as we move towards the end of the PowerPoint. Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Commission of Pasco. In February 2018, the Pasco City Council approved a resolution reinforcing the city's commitment to being an inclusive city and creating a community inclusivity commission. The resolution declares that the city as a whole is committed to embracing diversity and prompting equality among our workforce, residences, businesses, and visitors. The resolution further provides a 7-member ad hoc commission to assist the council in the efforts to promote inclusivity in Pasco. The commission is charged to conduct activities, identify means, and make such recommendations to the City Council for action, education, and guidance to foster an environment that includes, accepts, respects, and appreciates all members of our community. The Council approved a name change in June 2019 to the Pasco Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Commission and extended the terms of the commissioners to December 2020. Celebrate diversity. There are so many chances to celebrate our diverse cultures and creeds and orientations that surround us. These are just a few things that I wanted to note, but please know there is so many more on so many different levels within the town of Pasco. So PFLAG and the Pride Parade, the Taco Crawl, Diversity through Culinary Arts, Downtown Commitment to Sharing and Celebrating Hispanic Heritage, the Tri-Cities Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and recently, November 2nd, Pasco Day of Hope. Education reaches beyond the classroom. And I know that is something that we as CIS, we as an organization, we as individuals believe and know with everything that's going on in our communities, in our nation, in our world today, I want to take a minute to kind of reflect on that and just be really candid with you. And before I do, there is a quote that I found by Martin Luther King Jr. that I thought not only encompasses the work that we do, but also kind of speaks to what we're going through now. It says, the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character. That is the goal of true education. Because this PowerPoint is about Pasco, and this message came out from the Pasco School Board today while we were creating this PowerPoint, as the DEI team, thought it was really important to include that. Not only do I think that this speaks volumes of the Pasco School District and just how amazing they are already, but how dedicated they are to their students and to creating a safe area for their students to come to. And in this current climate, still being there for their students and trying to figure it out when they can't be face-to-face with their students in the classroom. It's kind of a lengthy letter. It is in here, so you guys can definitely come back and read it. But I just wanted to highlight a section that really spoke to me, and hopefully it speaks to you too. And it says, through education, we must break down continued patterns of bias, marginalization, and discrimination. We must stop and listen when our children and families experience the pain and fear of racism. We must help our children understand the purpose of taking peaceful action and using their voice. We must have the courage to act thoughtfully and to create a culture of value, dignity, and respect. Beyond providing equity, we must provide hope. Thank you for navigating this PowerPoint with us. I hope you found it useful. I hope that you learned a few things, and maybe you still have some questions about stuff. I know that this was not an in-depth necessarily view of Pasco and its history. I think it gave a pretty good overview, and I know I learned a few things, which I was really happy to maybe have a closer connection to Pasco now. I understand it a little bit more, which I really think is the point of us diving into the history of the towns that we work in. It's important to understand who we're working with and how they came to be who they are. And really the foundation of all that is the community in which somebody lives, the community in which they're raised, the environment. So hopefully moving forward, we are able to have a bit of a deeper understanding of those that we are serving in that area